Judas Iscariot, a name that sends chills down the spine of billions. But what if I told you there's a dark secret about him that changes everything you thought you knew? In the next few minutes, you'll discover why Judas, one of the 12 chosen apostles, made the most catastrophic decision in human history, and the shocking truth about what happened in his final moments that the church rarely talks about. Did he really have a choice? Was he just a pawn in a divine plan? And why did Jesus, knowing everything, still offer him bread at the Last Supper? The answers will blow your mind. But first, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from right now. I'm always amazed to see how far these biblical mysteries reach across the globe. And if you're ready for more jaw-dropping revelations like this one, smash that subscribe button and hit the like. It takes just a second, but helps me bring you more incredible content. Now, let's expose the haunting truth about Judas Iscariot that's been buried for centuries. The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone walls of Jerusalem, but Judas of Kerioth felt no warmth on his face. His fingers trembled as they clutched the leather pouch at his side, 30 pieces of silver weighing heavier than any burden he had ever carried. The coins clinked softly with each step, a metallic whisper that seemed to echo his deed from the night before. "What have I done?" The question escaped his lips for the 100th time since dawn broke over the city. The marketplace buzzed with its usual morning activity, merchants hawking their wares, children chasing chickens through the narrow alleyways, women balancing water jugs on their hips. Yet to Judas all of it felt distant, muffled, as if he were observing life through a thick veil. He had been the keeper of the purse, the trusted one among the 12. For 3 years, he had walked alongside the teacher, witnessed miracles that defied explanation, heard words that stirred souls and challenged the very foundations of their faith. And last night in the Garden of Gethsemane, he had sealed his betrayal with a kiss. The silver burned against his hip as he stumbled through the streets. Each face he passed seemed to know his shame, though none could possibly understand the turmoil raging within him. He had expected to feel vindicated, justified in his decision. The teacher had not been the political messiah they had hoped for. No armies raised, no Romans expelled, no throne reclaimed. Instead, there had been talk of suffering, of sacrifice, of a kingdom not of this world. Judas. The voice stopped. Him cold. He spun around, heart hammering, expecting to see accusation in familiar eyes. But the crowded street revealed only strangers going about their morning routines. The voice had been clear, unmistakable, yet no one seemed to have spoken. Judas of Kerioth. There it was again. Not harsh or condemning, but gentle, almost sorrowful. This time Judas noticed an elderly man seated in the shadow of a doorway, his weathered hands resting on a gnarled walking stick. The man's eyes, despite their milky appearance, seemed to pierce straight through to Judas's soul. "Who are you?" Judas whispered, approaching cautiously. The old man smiled, revealing gaps where teeth had once been. "I am Simeon, a keeper of stories, a witness to the weight of choices. Sit with me, son of Kerioth." Something in the man's voice compelled obedience. Judas sank onto the dusty ground beside him, the pouch of silver settling heavily in his lap. "You carry more than coins," Simeon observed, his blind eyes somehow seeing everything. "You carry the burden of a choice that has shattered your world." "How could you know?" Judas's voice cracked. "Because I too once made a choice that haunted me for decades. I was young, prideful, certain that my way was right. I betrayed my brother for an inheritance, convinced myself it was justice. The gold I gained brought me comfort, but cost me my family, my peace, my very self." Judas felt tears sting his eyes. "There is no redemption for what I've done. I betrayed innocent blood." Simeon's weathered hand found Judas's shoulder with surprising accuracy. "The teacher you followed, what did he say about forgiveness?" 70 times 7, Judas whispered, remembering the words that now seemed to mock him. "And did he place conditions on that forgiveness? Did he say, 'Except for Judas'?" The question hung in the air like incense. Judas had never considered that the Master's teachings might apply even to him, even after this ultimate betrayal. "But I kissed him," Judas choked out. "I marked him for death with a gesture of love." "And Peter will deny him 3 times before the rooster crows," Simeon said softly. "Yet Peter's story is not finished, and neither is yours." The old man struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his staff. "There is a path, Judas of Iscariot, but it requires something more difficult than death. It requires you to live with your choice and find a way to transform it into something that serves a greater purpose." "How?" The word was barely a breath. Simeon pointed his staff toward the Temple Mount. "Return what was never truly yours. Face those who used your weakness for their gain. Then seek the place where earth meets sky, the Mount of Olives. There you will find the beginning of your true journey." Before Judas could respond, the crowd surged between them, and when it cleared, the old man had vanished. Only the weight of the silver remained, and now a glimmer of something Judas had thought forever lost: hope. The temple's golden walls gleamed in the afternoon sun as Judas climbed the broad steps, each footfall echoing his thundering heartbeat. The leather pouch swung at his side, the silver pieces singing their damning song. Merchants packed up their stalls in the outer courtyard, the day's business drawing to a close, but Judas had eyes only for the inner chambers where the chief priests conducted their affairs. Caiaphas stood near the altar, his ornate robes catching the light from the high windows. Beside him, Annas whispered something that drew a thin smile across the high priest's lips. They looked up as Judas approached, and their expressions shifted: surprise, then calculation, then something resembling amusement. "Ah, the Iscariot," Caiaphas said smoothly. "Come to claim additional payment? The deed is done, the carpenter is in custody. I've come to return this." Judas threw the pouch at their feet, coins scattering across the polished floor with a metallic crash that echoed through the chamber. "I was wrong. He is innocent." Annas laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Innocent?" He claimed to be the Son of God, threatened to destroy the temple, stirred the people to sedition. "You did us and Rome a great service." "I've sinned," Judas said, his voice stronger now. "I've betrayed innocent blood." "That," Caiaphas said coldly, "is your concern, not ours." The high priest turned away, but Judas grabbed his sleeve. "Take back the silver. Undo what has been done." Caiaphas yanked his arm free, his face darkening. "What is done cannot be undone. You came to us willingly, took our coin gladly. The carpenter's fate was sealed long before your kiss in the garden. Then his blood is on your hands as well," Judas declared. "No," Annas interjected, bending to gather the scattered coins. "This is blood money. It cannot enter the temple treasury. We'll use it to buy the potter's field, a burial place for strangers." "How fitting." The 2 priests exchanged knowing looks, and Judas realized with crystal clarity how thoroughly he had been used. They had needed someone from the inner circle, someone whose betrayal would legitimize their actions. He had been their perfect tool, driven by disappointment and greed into their waiting web. "You planned this," Judas whispered. "You knew my weaknesses, my frustrations." Caiaphas shrugged. "Every man has a price. Yours was remarkably reasonable." Rage flared in Judas's chest, but it quickly turned inward. They were right. He had been bought cheaply, his loyalty weighed against silver and found wanting. "But," Simeon's words echoed in his mind, "your story is not finished." "Keep your blood money," Judas said, straightening his shoulders. "Buy your field for the dead. But know this, what you do today will echo through eternity. The innocent blood you spill will cry out from the ground." He turned to leave, but Annas called after him. "Where will you go, betrayer? Who will welcome Judas Iscariot now?" Judas paused at the threshold. "To find what I should have sought from the beginning, redemption." The sun had begun its descent toward the western hills as Judas emerged from the temple. The city below buzzed with preparation for the Passover feast, but he felt disconnected from it all, a ghost walking among the living. The Mount of Olives rose before him, its slopes dotted with ancient olive groves and winding paths. As he climbed, memories flooded back, countless evenings spent on these slopes with the teacher and the others. Here they had prayed, laughed, debated deep into the night. Here the Master had wept over Jerusalem, seeing its future destruction. Here, just last night, Judas had led the temple guards to their secret place. Near the summit, where the city spread below like a tapestry of stone and shadow, Judas found a familiar grove. The gnarled olive trees seemed to remember him, their branches whispering accusations in the evening breeze. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his betrayal. "Master," he whispered to the darkening sky, "I know you can no longer hear me, but I must speak. I thought you were weak, that your kingdom was a fantasy. I wanted revolution, blood, victory over our oppressors. I couldn't see that your revolution was deeper, a transformation of hearts, not governments." Tears flowed freely now, watering the dusty ground. "I kissed you. Of all the ways to mark you, I chose the gesture of affection, of loyalty. In that moment I became everything I despised, a hypocrite, a betrayer, a tool of the very powers I claimed to oppose." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of olive blossoms and something else, a presence familiar yet changed. Judas looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows between the trees. His heart stopped. It was Matthew, his fellow disciple. But his face bore an expression Judas had never seen, neither hatred nor condemnation, but profound sorrow. "Matthew," Judas gasped, scrambling to his feet. "How did you—" "We all fled," Matthew said quietly. "After they took him, we scattered like sheep. Peter followed at a distance, but even he—" His voice trailed off. "You must hate me," Judas said. Matthew studied him for a long moment. "I thought I would. When we realized what you had done, rage consumed me. But then I remembered his words, 'Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you.' If we're to follow his teachings, Judas, we must follow all of them. There can be no forgiveness for what I've done." "That's not for you to decide," Matthew replied. "He taught us about a father who welcomes home prodigal sons, a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to find one lost lamb. Why should you be beyond such grace?" "Because I didn't just stray," Judas said bitterly. "I led the wolves to the flock." Matthew was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "Do you remember the story he told about the two debtors? One owed 50 denarii, the other 500. Both were forgiven. Which loved the creditor more?" "The one forgiven more," Judas whispered, remembering. "Then perhaps," Matthew said softly, "your very betrayal positions you to love most deeply, to understand grace most fully. Perhaps your story isn't ending, it's beginning." A horn sounded from the city below, the signal for the Passover feast to begin. Matthew turned to go, then looked back. "He's still alive, Judas. Whatever happens next, it hasn't happened yet. There's still time." "Time for what?" "To choose differently, to become who you were meant to be, not who you've been." As Matthew disappeared into the darkness, Judas stood alone on the mountain, caught between despair and hope. The stars began to emerge overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began its evening song. The Mount of Olives held its breath, waiting to see what Judas Iscariot would choose next. The night deepened around Judas as he remained on the Mount of Olives, wrestling with thoughts that threatened to tear him apart. The city below glowed with countless Passover fires. Families gathered in celebration of deliverance, while he stood alone with his deliverance seemingly beyond reach. Hours passed. The moon traced its arc across the sky, casting shifting shadows through the olive groves. Judas neither sat nor fully stood, caught in a liminal space between action and paralysis. Matthew's words echoed in his mind, warring with the voices of condemnation that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath his feet. Near midnight, exhaustion finally drove him to seek shelter beneath an ancient olive tree. Its massive trunk had split long ago, creating a natural hollow that generations of shepherds had used for shelter. As Judas settled into this refuge, the events of the past days crashed over him like a tide. He closed his eyes, and immediately the scenes played out again, the woman with the alabaster jar pouring precious nard over the master's feet, his own voice, sharp with false indignation. "Why this waste? This could have been sold and given to the poor." But even as the words had left his mouth, he'd known his real concern was for the money he could no longer skim from such a sale. The master's gentle rebuke, "Leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing. The poor you will always have with—" You, but you will not always have me. Those words had stung more than any direct accusation could have. In that moment, Judas had felt exposed, his greed laid bare not through confrontation, but through the master's unfailing ability to see the heart behind the words. It was then that the seed of betrayal, long dormant, had begun to sprout. A cold wind swept through the grove, and Judas pulled his cloak tighter. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed him, pulling him into a realm of dreams, more vivid than waking life. He found himself standing in a vast desert, the sun beating down mercilessly. Before him stretched two paths. One led toward a distant oasis, green and inviting. The other disappeared into a wasteland of stone and thorn. As he stood uncertain, a figure materialized beside him. It was the Master, but not as Judas had last seen him. This version glowed with an inner light, his eyes holding depths of compassion that seemed infinite. "Teacher," Judas gasped, falling to his knees. "Forgive me, I beg you." The Master's hand touched his shoulder. "Rise, Judas. We have much to discuss. How can you even look at me? I betrayed you with a kiss. And Peter will deny me 3 times. Thomas will doubt my resurrection. Paul will persecute my followers before becoming my greatest apostle. The question is not what you have done, but what you will do now." The Master gestured to the two paths. "You stand at a crossroads. The easy path leads to oblivion, a forgetting of pain through the forgetting of self. The difficult path leads through the valley of shadow, but at its end lies redemption." "I deserve the wasteland," Judas said. "Deserving is not the language of grace," the Master replied. "Did the thief on the cross deserve paradise? Did Saul deserve to become Paul? Love operates beyond the mathematics of merit. But my betrayal was foretold, yes. Someone had to fulfill that role in the grand narrative. But prophecy does not negate choice, and your choices from this moment forward remain your own." The dream landscape shifted. Now they stood in a garden, not Gethsemane, but a new garden, filled with plants Judas had never seen. Their leaves shimmered with colors that had no names, and their fragrance spoke of worlds beyond imagining. "What is this place?" Judas whispered. "The Garden of Second Chances," the Master said. "Every plant here was once a seed of failure, transformed by grace into something beautiful. That thorny vine? It grew from Peter's denial. Those flowering trees, from doubting Thomas's skepticism. And there," he pointed to a bare patch of soil, "is where your transformation could begin." "Nothing could grow from what I've planted," Judas said bitterly. The Master knelt and scooped up a handful of the empty soil. "Do you remember the parable of the mustard seed? The smallest seed becomes the mightiest tree. Sometimes the deepest repentance yields the most profound transformation." He let the soil sift through his fingers. "But the choice is yours. You can water this ground with bitter tears of self-condemnation, and nothing will grow. Or you can water it with tears of genuine repentance, accepting forgiveness not as an escape from consequences, but as the power to transform them." The dream began to fade, colors bleeding into gray. The Master's form grew translucent, but his voice remained clear. "Dawn approaches, Judas. Soon you must choose. Remember, I came not for the righteous, but for sinners. The question has never been whether you are worthy of redemption, but whether you will accept it." Judas woke with a start. The eastern sky showed the first blush of dawn, painting the Mount of Olives in shades of rose and gold. His face was wet with tears, though he couldn't remember crying. As consciousness fully returned, he became aware that he wasn't alone. A woman sat nearby, her face hidden beneath a dark veil. She held a small clay lamp, its flame flickering in the dawn breeze. "Who are you?" Judas asked, his voice hoarse. The woman lifted her veil, revealing a face marked by both beauty and sorrow. "My name is Miriam. I was once known by other names, names that spoke of my shame, my 7 demons, my life of sin. But he changed all that. Mary Magdalene." Judas recognized her now, though she looked different, older perhaps, or maybe just worn by the night's events. "They've taken him," she said simply. "The Sanhedrin condemned him in a night trial. Pilate will decide his fate when the sun rises." "I know," Judas whispered. "I led them to him." She studied him for a long moment, and he braced for the accusation, the hatred. Instead, she said, "I know what it is to be possessed by darkness. Judas, 7 demons ruled my life before he freed me. They whispered constantly, voices of shame, lust, despair. Even after he cast them out, their echoes remained. Why are you telling me this? Because I recognize the look in your eyes. The demons of guilt and self-hatred are among the strongest. They convince us we're beyond redemption, that our sins are too great for forgiveness. But I'm living proof." "That's a lie." She stood, gathering her cloak around her. "He's still alive, Judas. Whatever you've done, his story isn't over, and neither is yours. The question is, will you let your guilt paralyze you, or will you find a way to serve the kingdom you once betrayed?" Before he could respond, she was gone, hurrying down the path toward the city. Judas remained beneath the olive tree, her words mingling with the dream's message. The sun broke the horizon, flooding the world with light. Somewhere in the city below, the master faced his accusers. Here on the mountain, Judas faced a choice that would define not just his death, but his life. He stood slowly, muscles stiff, from the night spent on hard ground. The 2 paths from his dream seemed to materialize before him, one leading down to the city, to face whatever consequences awaited, the other leading away into the wilderness of self-imposed exile. For a long moment he wavered. Then, remembering the garden of second chances, the soil waiting for seeds of transformation, Judas took his first step toward the city. Toward judgment, yes, but also toward the possibility of redemption. The Mount of Olives watched him go, its ancient trees whispering prayers on the morning wind. Whatever came next, Judas Iscariot was no longer running from his choices. He was walking toward their transformation. The streets of Jerusalem pulsed with unusual energy as Judas descended from the Mount of Olives. Word of the night's events had spread like wildfire. The popular teacher from Galilee arrested, tried by the Sanhedrin, now standing before Pilate himself. Crowds gathered in clusters, voices raised in debate and speculation. Judas pulled his cloak hood forward, hoping to pass unrecognized, but his very furtiveness drew attention. Near the lower city, a group of women whispered and pointed. He quickened, his pace only to collide with a man carrying water jars. "Watch yourself," the man growled, then paused, recognition dawning. "You're one of his followers, the Galileans' men." I was," Judas stammered. The man's eyes narrowed. "Was? When your master needs you most, you abandon him?" He spat at Judas's feet. "Coward!" If only he knew, Judas thought bitterly. A coward would be an improvement over what I am. He pressed on, drawn by an invisible cord toward the praetorium, where Pilate held court. The crowds thickened as he approached, a sea of bodies pressing toward the judgment seat. Over their heads he could see the Roman standards, the gleam of soldiers' armor, and there, his heart clenched, the familiar figure of the master, standing bound but unbowed, before the Roman governor. "Crucify him!" The cry rose from somewhere in the crowd, quickly taken up by others. "Crucify him!" Judas felt his knees weaken. This mob fury, had his betrayal unleashed this? He tried to push forward, driven by a desperate need to cry out the truth, to tell them all how he had been manipulated, how the master was innocent. But the crowd was too thick, too volatile. A hand gripped his arm. He turned to find Peter, the fisherman's face haggard with grief and something else, shame that matched Judas's own. "Peter," Judas gasped, "you have to help me. We have to—" Tell them what?" Peter's voice was hollow. "That we're his disciples. I've already denied knowing him 3 times, just as he said I would." Tears streaked the big man's weathered cheeks. "We've all betrayed him, Judas, each in our own way." "But I led them to him." "Yes, I know." Peter's grip tightened. "But I promised to die with him, then fled like a frightened child. James and John, the sons of thunder, are hiding in an upper room. Thomas has vanished entirely. We've all failed him." The crowd's roar intensified. Through gaps between bodies, Judas glimpsed Pilate washing his hands in a silver basin, the gesture's meaning clear to all. The death sentence had been pronounced. "No," Judas moaned. "This can't be happening." Peter released his arm. It is happening. The question now is what we do next. Do we compound our betrayal by giving in to despair, or do we find some way to honor what he taught us? Before Judas could answer, the crowd began to move. The condemned man was being led away, a rough wooden beam forced across his shoulders. The Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrows, had begun. Against his better judgment, against every instinct screaming at him to flee, Judas found himself following. The procession wound through the narrow streets, gathering onlookers like a river, collecting tributaries. Some wept openly, others jeered and mocked. Roman soldiers kept order with casual brutality, shoving aside any who came too close. At one point, the master stumbled under the beam's weight. A woman broke from the crowd, offering him water only, to be roughly pushed back by a guard. But in that moment, as the master raised his head to thank her with his eyes, his gaze swept the crowd and found Judas. Time stopped. In those eyes, Judas expected to see hatred, condemnation, the fury of betrayal. Instead, he saw something that broke him more completely than any curse could have: compassion, understanding, love that persisted despite everything. The moment passed. The procession moved on, but Judas stood rooted, trembling. That look had conveyed more than words ever could. It said, "I knew, I chose you anyway. Your betrayal is part of a larger story, but your part in that story isn't finished. Move along." A Roman soldier shoved him roughly, breaking his paralysis. Judas stumbled forward, swept along by the crowd toward the hill called Golgotha, the place of the skull. The very name sent shivers through him. Here, Rome displayed its power through public torture and death. Here his betrayal would reach its ultimate consequence. The crowd spread across the hillside as the soldiers went about their grim work. The sound of hammers on iron, the cries of pain, the jeers of the crowd. It all blended into a symphony of human cruelty that made Judas want to cover his ears and run. 3 crosses rose against the sky. The master hung in the center, flanked by common criminals. The inscription above his head, meant as mockery, proclaimed a truth the mockers couldn't comprehend: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Hours passed. The sky darkened unnaturally, as if creation itself mourned. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no rain fell. On the cross, the master spoke occasionally, words of forgiveness for his executioners, comfort for his mother, promise to the repentant thief beside him. Judas found himself pressed against a large stone, unable to leave yet unable to draw closer. Around him, the crowd's mood shifted from bloodthirsty excitement to uneasy fear as the darkness deepened. My God, why have you forsaken me?" The cry pierced the gloom, and Judas felt it strike his very soul. He knew those words, the beginning of a psalm of David, a lament that ended in triumph. Even now, facing death, the master was teaching, pointing to scriptures, showing them the meaning hidden in ancient words. A figure materialized beside him, Simeon, the blind seer from the temple steps, though how he had navigated the crowd in his condition was beyond understanding. "You came," the old man said simply. "I couldn't stay away," Judas whispered. "This is my doing. All of it." "Is it?" Simeon's unseeing eyes turned toward the cross. "Or are you witnessing something greater than your betrayal, more profound than your guilt? Look beyond your role, Judas. See the larger tapestry being woven. I see only death, failure, the end of everything we hoped for. Death, yes, but whose victory? The priests who manipulated you? The Romans who wield the nails, or something else entirely?" Simeon leaned on his staff. "Remember Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery. What they meant for evil, God used for good. Your kiss in the garden, was it the end of the story or a necessary chapter in a greater narrative?" Thunder crashed overhead and the earth itself trembled. On the center cross, the master drew his final breaths. "It is finished," he gasped, and with those words, something fundamental shifted in the world. The earth shook violently. Rocks split apart. In the distance, someone cried out that the temple veil had torn in two. Roman soldiers, hardened by countless executions, fell to their knees in terror. Truly this was the Son of God, Judas heard their centurion exclaim. But Judas barely noticed the chaos around him. Those 3 words echoed in his mind. It is finished, finished, complete, accomplished. Not it is ruined or it is over, but finished, like an artist's masterpiece receiving its final brushstroke. Do you understand now? Simeon asked gently. Judas shook his head, tears streaming freely. I understand nothing. I thought I was clever, thought I could force his hand, make him reveal his power. Instead, I've helped murder the only truly good man I've ever known. Have you? Simeon smiled sadly. Or have you played the role assigned to you in a drama written before the foundation of the world? The scriptures spoke of betrayal, of 30 pieces of silver, of a friend's kiss marking the lamb for slaughter. Someone had to fulfill those words. Then I had no choice? You had every choice. You could have resisted the greed in your heart, could have trusted instead of doubted, could have loved instead of betrayed. But having chosen darkness, even your darkness serves the light. That is the mystery of redemption. Nothing is wasted, nothing is beyond transformation. The crowds began to disperse as soldiers took down the bodies. The Master's followers, those brave enough to show themselves, received his broken form with reverent hands. Judas watched from afar as they carried him away, led by the same women who had supported his ministry, the same women who had seen past their own shame to find hope. Night fell truly now, the supernatural darkness giving way to natural evening. Judas stood alone on the hillside, Simeon having vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. The place of the skull was empty, save for the blood-stained crosses and the echoes of the day's trauma. But something had changed within Judas. The crushing weight of guilt remained, but alongside it grew something else, a glimmer of understanding. His betrayal hadn't derailed God's plan. It had been woven into it. His darkness had helped reveal the light. His faithlessness had showcased perfect faith. The question now was, what would he do with this knowledge? Would he, like Peter, find a way back to the community of believers? Would he carry this understanding into the world, a broken vessel bearing testimony to grace? Or would he let guilt have the final word? As he turned to leave Golgotha, Judas felt he stood once more at a crossroads. Behind him lay the worst day of his life, the culmination of his betrayal. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. The Master was dead, but his words lived on. The movement seemed crushed, but seeds had been planted that no force could uproot. Judas took a deep breath and began walking. Not toward escape this time, but toward whatever redemption might yet be possible for one who had kissed the face of love and delivered it to death. The night was dark, but somewhere in that darkness, grace waited to transform even the deepest guilt into testimony of mercy. His story was far from over. 3 days passed in a blur of grief and confusion. Judas wandered the outskirts of Jerusalem like a spectre, unable to enter the city proper, yet incapable of leaving entirely. He slept in caves, ate whatever he could forage, and wrestled with thoughts that threatened to tear his sanity apart. On the morning of the 3rd day, as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pearl, he found himself drawn once more to the Mount of Olives. The garden where he had betrayed the Master lay before him, its ancient trees standing witness to his shame. He entered slowly, each step a pilgrimage of penance. The garden was empty, peaceful in the early light. Judas knelt where he thought. The betrayal had occurred, pressing his forehead to the cool earth. Words of prayer stuck in his throat. How could he speak to a God he had so profoundly betrayed? Judas. The voice was soft, familiar, impossible. Judas raised his head, heart pounding. A figure stood among the olive trees, wrapped in simple white garments, face partially hidden by the morning shadows. No, Judas whispered. It cannot be. The figure stepped forward into a shaft of sunlight, and Judas gasped. It was the Master, not as he had last seen him, broken and bloodied, but radiant with a light that seemed to come from within. Teacher! The word emerged as a croak. But you died, I saw you die. Death could not hold me, Judas. The Master's voice carried no trace of accusation. I told you I would rise on the 3rd day, though none truly understood. Judas scrambled, backward, terror and joy warring in his chest. I'm dreaming or mad. You're dead because of me. I live in spite of death, not because of you or anyone else." The master approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. "Your betrayal was real, Judas, as was Peter's denial, as was Thomas's doubt. But my love is more real than all of these." "Don't." Judas covered his face with his hands. "I can't bear your forgiveness. Let me carry my guilt. It's all I have left." Gentle hands pulled his own away from his face. The master knelt before him, eye to eye, as he had once knelt to wash the disciples' feet. "Your guilt is not your identity." "Judas, you are more than your worst moment. How can you say that? I sold you for silver, and I bought you with blood." The master's eyes held depths of compassion that seemed infinite. "Not just you, all humanity. Every betrayal, every denial, every moment of faithlessness was nailed to that cross. The question is not whether you are forgiven. That is already accomplished. The question is whether you will accept forgiveness." Tears flowed freely down Judas's face. "I don't deserve—" "Deserving is not the currency of grace." The master smiled sadly. "If redemption came only to the deserving, heaven would be empty. Peter didn't deserve restoration after his denials. Paul won't deserve apostleship after persecuting my followers. Yet both will become pillars of the church to come." "And me?" Judas's voice was barely a whisper. "What becomes of Judas the betrayer?" The master stood, pulling Judas to his feet. "That depends on you. You can remain Judas the betrayer, forever defined by one terrible choice, or you can become Judas the redeemed, a living testament to the power of grace. But the others, they'll never accept me." Peter thought the same after his denial. He wept bitter tears, certain his cowardice had severed him from my love. "Yet I will restore him by the Sea of Galilee, asking 3 times if he loves me, once for each denial." Your path to restoration may be different, but it exists. The garden around them seemed to shimmer with potential. Birds began their morning songs, and the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Life continued, renewed, despite the darkness that had seemed so final. "What must I do?" Judas asked. "First, forgive yourself. This is often harder than receiving divine forgiveness. Second, return to the community of believers. They will struggle to accept you. Wounds take time to heal, but healing is possible. Third, tell your story. Let others know that no sin is beyond redemption, no person beyond hope. They'll hate me. Some will. Others will see in your story a mirror of their own failures and find hope. Your testimony could save countless souls who believe themselves beyond salvation." The master began to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. "I must go now. Others need to see me to believe. But remember, Judas, I chose you knowing everything. Your betrayal, your repentance, your potential for transformation. All of it was known, and still I called you friend." "Wait!" Judas reached out, but his hands passed through empty air. The master had vanished, leaving only the lingering sense of presence and the faint fragrance of nard, the same perfume Mary had used to anoint his feet. Judas stood alone in the garden, but everything had changed. The weight of guilt remained, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it had transformed into something else, a responsibility to live differently, to honor the grace he'd received through the way he lived his remaining days. He left the garden with purposeful steps, heading toward the city. The upper room where the disciples had shared the Last Supper would be his destination. If the Master had truly risen, they would gather there, trying to make sense of the impossible. The journey through Jerusalem's streets felt different this time. He walked openly, hood thrown back, meeting the eyes of those he passed. Some recognized him. He saw it in their faces, the flash of understanding followed by disgust or curiosity. But he didn't hide. Near the Temple Mount, he encountered a group of Pharisees deep in heated discussion. Fragments of their conversation reached him. Empty tomb, guards bribed, disciples stole the body. So the resurrection was already causing ripples. The authorities were scrambling for explanations, for ways to contain what couldn't be contained. Judas almost pitied them. They were trying to hold back the dawn with their bare hands. The house containing the upper room stood on a quiet side street. Judas paused at the entrance, gathering courage. From inside came the murmur of voices, excited, confused, argumentative. He knocked. The voices ceased instantly. Footsteps approached cautiously. The door opened a crack, revealing John's youthful face. The beloved disciple's eyes widened in shock. "Judas! Peace be with you, John." The traditional greeting felt strange on his lips. "May I enter?" John glanced back into the room, clearly torn. Behind him, Judas heard Peter's gruff voice. "Who?" "Is it? It's Judas!" A crash of overturned furniture. Peter burst into view, face red with rage. "You dare show your face here, after what you've done?" "Peter, please. I've seen him. The Master. He lives." "Liar!" Peter raised his fist, but John caught his arm. "Wait, look at his face. Something's different." Others crowded behind them. Thomas, skeptical as always. James and Andrew, protective of their volatile brother. Matthew studying Judas with the calculating look of a former tax collector. "Let him speak," Mary Magdalene's voice came from within. "I've seen the Lord too. If he can forgive, who are we to withhold mercy?" Reluctantly, they allowed him entry. The upper room was much as he remembered. The table where they'd shared bread and wine, the cushions where they'd reclined, the very air heavy with memory. Judas stood before them, feeling like a defendant before a jury. "I know you have every right to cast me out. What I did is unforgivable by human standards. But I've seen him. In the garden where I betrayed him, he appeared to me. He spoke of forgiveness, of transformation, of testimony." "Convenient," Thomas muttered. "Claim a vision and all is forgiven?" "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," Judas said quietly. "I'm telling you what I experienced. He said death couldn't hold him. He said my story wasn't finished. He said even the deepest sin could become testimony to grace. He said similar to me." Peter's voice was rough with emotion. "By the fire, after I denied him. His eyes—" He trailed off, lost in memory. Mary Magdalene stepped forward. "I found the tomb empty. The angels said he had risen. Then I saw him myself, though I thought he was the gardener at first. He spoke my name, and I knew." "We saw him." "Too," said Cleopas, one of the followers Judas barely knew. "On the road to Emmaus, walked with us, explained the scriptures, broke bread. Then we recognized him and he vanished." The room erupted in overlapping testimonies. Apparently the risen master had been busy, appearing to various followers, each encounter tailored to their specific needs. Peter needed restoration from denial. Mary needed confirmation of hope. The Emmaus travelers needed understanding of Scripture. And Judas? He had needed to know that even the ultimate betrayal could be redeemed. "So what now?" Andrew asked when the testimonies died down. "Do we accept him back, the betrayer?" "I was a denier," Peter said slowly. "If the Master forgave me—" "We were all cowards," John added. "We all fled. We all failed him in different ways." Thomas shook his head. "I still don't believe it, any of it. Until I see the wounds in his hands, put my finger in the nail marks, I won't believe." As if in response to his doubt, the air in the room shimmered. Despite the locked door, a figure appeared among them, the Master, as real as any of them, yet somehow more vivid, more present. "Peace be with you," he said, and his voice filled the room like music. Several disciples fell to their knees. Others stood frozen in shock. Thomas stared, mouth agape. The Master turned to him. "Put your finger here, Thomas. See my hands. Reach out and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas stumbled forward, reaching toward the wounded hands, then fell to his knees. "My Lord and my God." "Because you have seen me, you have believed," the Master said gently. "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Then his gaze found Judas, who had pressed himself against the wall, overwhelmed by this public appearance. The Master approached him, and the room held its breath. "Judas, you came. You told me to return to the community, and they welcomed you." Peter stepped forward. We're learning to, Master. It's not easy." The Master smiled. "Nothing worthwhile ever is, but this man's testimony will reach those you cannot. The self-righteous will not hear you, Peter. They'll see a fisherman. They'll dismiss John as a dreamer, Thomas as a doubter. But Judas, the one who fell furthest and was lifted highest, his story will pierce hearts that yours cannot touch. He turned back to Judas. Your journey is just beginning. It will not be easy. Many will refuse to believe that Judas Iscariot could be redeemed, but some will hear your story and find hope for their own redemption. You will be a bridge between the desperate and the divine. I don't know if I'm strong enough, Judas whispered. You're not. None of you are. But my strength works through your weakness. My power is made perfect in brokenness. The crack in the vessel is where the light enters. The Master addressed them all now. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Each of you has a unique story, a specific audience. Peter, you will strengthen your brothers. John, you will testify to love. Thomas, you will reach the skeptics. And Judas, he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle, you will be hope for the hopeless, proof that no one is beyond redemption. With that, he breathed on them. Receive the Holy Spirit. As the Father sent me, I am sending you. The room filled with a wind that touched no physical object but stirred every soul. When it passed, the Master had vanished again, but his presence lingered like perfume in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Peter cleared his throat. Well, I suppose we have work to do. One by one, the disciples began to plan. There were testimonies to share, communities to build, a world to transform. The resurrection had changed everything, but the real work was just beginning. Judas found himself included in the planning, hesitantly at first, then with growing acceptance. His role would be different. He understood that. While others would proclaim the resurrection, boldly he would whisper it to the broken. While they would stand in temple courts, he would sit with the outcasts. While they performed miracles, he would be a miracle, living proof that grace could reach anyone. As night fell and the gathering broke up, Mary Magdalene approached him. It won't be easy, she said softly, living as a redeemed sinner in a world that prefers simple categories of good and evil. You've managed it, Judas observed. She smiled. With help. And you'll have help too. We're a community of the broken made whole, the lost now found. Welcome back, Judas. That night, for the first time since the betrayal, Judas slept peacefully. His dreams were no longer haunted by the clink of silver or the weight of a kiss. Instead, he dreamed of gardens where failed seeds became mighty trees, of light streaming through cracked vessels, of a love vast enough to encompass even the deepest betrayal. His story was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Years passed like flowing water, each one deepening the channels carved by grace. Judas had aged, his hair now more silver than black, his face etched with lines that spoke of sorrow transformed into wisdom. Jerusalem had become too small for the message that burned within the believing community, and they had scattered like seeds on the wind, each carrying their unique testimony to different soil. Judas found his calling in the forgotten places, the leper colonies outside city walls, the tax collector's booth where honest men feared to tread, the darkness where shame kept souls hidden from respectable society. While Peter preached to thousands and Paul debated in the academies, Judas sat with individual broken hearts, sharing his story in whispers and tears. On this particular evening, he sat by a small fire outside Jericho, the same city where the Master had once called Zacchaeus down from his tree. Across from him huddled a young man whose eyes held the hollow look Judas knew too well, the gaze of one who had betrayed everything he held dear. "Tell me again," the young man, Marcus, pleaded. "Tell me how he could forgive such a thing." Judas added another stick to the fire, watching the sparks rise toward the stars. "I've told this story 1,000 times, and each telling teaches me something new. Yes, I'll tell you again. He began as he always did, with the weight of silver in his palm and the bitter taste of disappointment in his mouth. But this telling felt different, charged with a significance he couldn't quite grasp. As he spoke of the garden, the kiss, the crushing guilt, he noticed others approaching the firelight. A woman carrying a shame too heavy for her years, an old soldier whose hands shook with memories of violence, a child whose eyes had seen too much. They settled silently around the fire, drawn by something in Judas's voice, not the polished oratory of a trained speaker, but the raw authenticity of shared brokenness. "I stood at Golgotha," Judas continued, his voice steady despite the tears that always came at this part. "Watched him die because of my betrayal, felt the earth shake with grief, heard him cry out in abandonment, and still somehow he looked at me with love. How?" The soldier's voice was rough. "How could he love the one who betrayed him?" "Because," Judas said softly, "his love isn't like ours. We love those who love us back, forgive those who deserve forgiveness. But his love, it's like the sun. It shines on righteous and unrighteous alike. It doesn't depend on our worthiness, but on his nature." He told them of the resurrection morning, the impossible joy of seeing the Master alive, the gentle restoration, offered in the garden where betrayal had occurred. Several listeners wept openly now, seeing their own failures reflected in his story. "But here's what took me longest to understand," Judas continued. "Forgiveness wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The Master didn't just pardon my sin, he transformed it into purpose. Every person I've met since who thought themselves beyond redemption, every soul convinced their sin was too great. They became my mission field." "And it works?" the woman asked. "The forgiveness, it lasts?" Judas smiled. "I wake every morning and choose to accept it anew. Some days are harder than others. The enemy loves to whisper reminders of my failure. But then I remember the Master's words, 'It is finished.' Not 'it might be finished if you're good enough.' Finished, complete, done." The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across their faces. In the distance, a nightingale began its serenade, and Judas was transported back to that first night on the Mount of Olives, when redemption had seemed impossible. "I have something to confess," Marcus said suddenly. "I'm not just any sinner, seeking comfort. I was one of Saul's men. Before he became Paul, I helped persecute the believers. I stood guard while they stoned Stephen. I heard him pray for our forgiveness as he died, and I laughed." The group tensed, but Judas raised a calming hand. "And now?" "Now I see Stephen's face in my dreams, hear his prayer, feel the weight of innocent blood." Marcus's voice broke. "If Paul could be forgiven, transformed, used for good, but he never killed anyone directly. I did." "Stephen's blood cries out," Judas said gently, "but not for vengeance. It cries for what he prayed, for forgiveness, for the opening of blind eyes, for the transformation of his killers into his brothers. You're here, aren't you? Seeking the very forgiveness he asked God to grant you." "But I don't deserve—" "None of us do," the soldier interrupted, his voice stronger now. "I crucified him. These hands drove the nails. I cast lots for his clothes, while he hung dying. Yet here I am, drawn by stories of grace I helped make necessary." The woman shifted closer to the fire. "I sold my body," she whispered, "defiled the temple God gave me, let shame define me until I couldn't remember who I was before the fall." The child, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. "I cursed God when my parents died, said terrible things, thought he was cruel, uncaring, hated him with all my small heart." Judas looked around the circle, seeing in each face a reflection of his own journey from darkness to light. And yet here we all are, drawn by the same hope. We're like moths to flame, except this fire doesn't consume, it refines. It burns away the dross and leaves gold. He reached into his pouch and pulled out an old coin, one of the original 30 pieces of silver. He had kept one as a reminder, though the others had long since been scattered to buy the potter's field. The silver caught the firelight, gleaming with false promise. "This was my price," he said. 30 pieces of silver for the Son of God, the worst trade in human history. But he took this transaction and made it the down payment for humanity's redemption. My betrayal became the door through which salvation entered the world. Not because betrayal is good, but because God can transform even the worst evil into ultimate good." He stood looking at each person in turn. "So yes, Marcus, you can be forgiven. Yes, soldier, your hands can become instruments of healing instead of death. Yes, dear sister, Your worth isn't determined by your past, but by the price he paid to redeem you. And yes, young one, your honest anger at God can become the foundation for honest faith. The fire had burned low, but no one moved to add wood. They sat in the gathering darkness, each processing their own journey toward grace. Finally, the woman asked, "What do we do now? How do we live with forgiveness?" Judas considered carefully. "First, we accept it daily. Forgiveness isn't a one-time event, but a continuous choice. Second, we extend to others what we've received. The forgiven become forgivers. Third, we tell our stories, not to glorify sin, but to magnify grace. The world is full of people who think they're too broken for redemption. We're living proof they're wrong." "Will you baptize us?" Marcus asked suddenly. "All of us? Here now?" Judas looked toward Jericho, where the Jordan River flowed, the same waters where John had baptized the Master, where everything had begun. "I'm not a leader like Peter or Paul. I'm just a forgiven sinner." "Exactly," the soldier said firmly. "That's why it should be you. You understand the weight of guilt and the power of grace. Who better to usher us from one life to another?" They walked together to the river, a strange procession of the broken seeking wholeness. The water was cold, fast-flowing, alive with possibility. One by one, Judas immersed them, watching the symbolic death and resurrection, remembering his own journey from betrayer to beloved. As the sun rose over the Jordan Valley, painting the sky in shades of redemption, 5 souls stood dripping on the riverbank, reborn. They would go their separate ways, carry their testimonies to different corners of the empire. Marcus would return to those he had persecuted, seeking forgiveness and offering testimony. The soldier would lay down his sword and take up the healers, herbs. The woman would found a home for girls trapped in the life she had escaped. The child would grow to become a teacher, showing others how doubt could deepen faith. And Judas? He would continue his quiet ministry, seeking out the lost coins, the wandering sheep, the prodigal sons and daughters. Each encounter added another layer to his understanding of grace, another verse to the song of redemption he had been singing since that morning in the garden. Months later, as winter gave way to spring, Judas received word that Peter wished to see him. The fisherman-turned-apostle was passing through Judea on his way to Jerusalem, and they met in the same upper room where the Master had appeared after the resurrection. "You've aged," Peter said, embracing him warmly. "As have you, brother. The years write their stories on our faces." They sat at the familiar table, sharing bread and wine, not the sacred communion, just the meal of 2 old friends carrying the weight of extraordinary experiences. "I hear reports," Peter said, "from all corners, stories of a man who finds the unfindable, who speaks hope to the hopeless. They call you the apostle to the lost." Judas laughed. "I'm no apostle, just a signpost pointing to grace. The Master called you friend in the garden, even as you betrayed him. I think he knew your destiny even then, that your fall would become a ladder for others to climb." They talked deep into the night, sharing stories of transformation, of communities built on the foundation of forgiveness, of a movement that had spread far beyond their wildest dreams. As dawn approached, Peter grew serious. "I sense my time is drawing close. Nero grows more violent. The persecution intensifies. Many of us will seal our testimonies with blood." "You're not afraid?" "Terrified," Peter admitted, "but also ready. I've lived to see thousands transformed, to establish the church on the rock of Christ's lordship. I once boasted I would die for him and failed. Now, by his grace, I might actually succeed." "And me?" Judas asked. "What of Judas the betrayer?" "You mean Judas the redeemed?" Peter smiled. "Your story will outlive us all. Long after the names of emperors fade, people will remember the one who fell furthest and was lifted highest. You'll be hope for every generation of sinners who think they've gone too far." They prayed together as the sun rose, 2 old men who had learned that endings could become beginnings, that failure wasn't final, that grace was greater than any sin. When they parted, it was with the knowledge they might not meet again this side of glory. Peter headed toward Rome and martyrdom, while Judas returned to his quiet ministry among the broken. Years turned to decades. The original witnesses passed one by one into legend. their testimonies preserved in letters and gospels. But Judas lived on, a walking reminder that the story of redemption was always beginning, always finding new hearts to transform. On his last night, surrounded by those he had led from darkness to light, Judas reflected on the journey that had begun with 30 pieces of silver and a traitorous kiss. He thought of the Master's words in the garden, "Your story isn't finished." Now, as his earthly chapter drew to a close, he understood the full truth of that promise. His story would never truly end, because it had become part of the greater story. The eternal narrative of a love that refuses to let anyone go, that transforms the worst failures into the greatest testimonies, that writes redemption across the darkest skies. "Tell them," he whispered to those gathered around his bed. "Tell everyone you meet. No sin is too great, no person too far gone. If grace could reach Judas Iscariot, it can reach anyone." The betrayer became the beloved. The ending became a beginning. The kiss of death became the seal of life. As his eyes closed for the final time, Judas heard again the voice that had called him that morning in the garden. Not condemning, not accusing, but welcoming. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." The moon rose over Jerusalem, the same moon that had witnessed a kiss in a garden so many years before. But now it shone on a legacy of hope, a testament to the power of redemption, a story that would echo through the ages. Even Judas was forgiven. Even Judas was loved. Even Judas found his way home. And in that truth lay hope for all humanity, the glorious, scandalous, transformative truth that no one is beyond the reach of grace.